On a lightly rainy afternoon, Rick Harrison was rushing home after a long day of stressful work. His car slowly rolled through the deserted streets of the suburbs. The surrounding scenery seemed to be immersed in a cold grey color, with scattered fallen dry leaves and gloomy roofs. As the car continued to glide, the dim lights from the street lamps illuminated the empty streets. Rick looked out the window and felt the silence mixed with cold winds. The rain fell lightly like a sad song. Suddenly, as his car passed by a deserted bus stop, Rick's eyes couldn't help but stop. On an old wooden chair, in the middle of the gloomy space, was a little girl about 6 years old. She was sitting huddled alone, her small shoulders trembling under the thin coat that was not enough to protect her from the cold of the rainy afternoon. Her face was wet, tears rolling down her cheeks, making people feel the utmost sadness and loneliness. Her hands were tightly holding an old doll, with her eyes looking into the distance as if searching for someone. This scene made Rick pause for a moment. Although many people were rushing past, no one stopped to pay attention to her. The passers-by bowed their heads, hurriedly avoiding the rain. No one seemed to care about the lost child. From her gaze, Rick felt a deep sadness, a sense of loneliness that he had never felt so clearly before. Only he saw it, and a strange urge arose within him to do something. Although he was always known for not easily changing or showing sympathy, Rick could not ignore this scene. He stopped the car, then stepped out of his car. The cold rain splashed on his face, but he did not care. When he approached the girl, he did not rush to ask the usual question, but in a softer voice than ever, he gently asked, "Are you okay? Why are you sitting here alone?" Those questions were not casual questions, but sincere inquiries, as if he was looking for an answer to the anxiety in his heart. The girl did not answer immediately. She just shook her head and continued to sob. The sobs made Rick's heart clench. He sat down beside her without hesitation, took out a small handkerchief from his pocket, gave it to her, and said softly, "You don't need to worry. I'm here." With that gentleness, something in the little girl's heart began to peel away the cold layer of ice. She slowly stopped crying and began to look up at Rick. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was also a bit of reassurance in them. Gradually, she opened her lips, her voice soft, occasionally stumbling, "I'm lost. I don't know what to do." She didn't have a phone, and despite her many attempts, she couldn't remember her mother's phone number. She only knew that she was far from home, in a cold rain, and felt completely alone. Rick felt a little strange. He, who often faced stressful and difficult situations at work, now found himself in an equally stressful situation. But unlike the meetings or negotiations he had been involved in before, this time, he couldn't wait for someone to come and solve this problem for him. He couldn't just leave the little girl sitting here alone in the cold rain. Rick looked around, searching for a solution. However, no one around seemed to care, and the passers-by only saw a pitiful scene but did not care. He knew that if he did not help the girl now, no one would. He said to her again, "We can find your mother together." The girl nodded, still confused, but her eyes began to show a little hope. She said that she had passed a store near her house, and that might be the place she missed the most. Rick decided to take her there. He gently patted her, then put her in his car, where he hoped to be able to bring her back to her mother, where she needed warmth and safety. The streets passed quietly, and Rick, although in a hurry, did not feel discouraged. He felt like he had found a new purpose, something more important than the work and meetings in his busy life. He began to hope that, if things went as planned, this action would not only help a little girl, but also bring him a sense of peace. The story continues as Rick and the little girl begin their journey to find her mother, with hope and patience being the keys to getting through this ordeal. The two of them, an adult and a little girl, sat in Rick's car, the car gliding through the quiet streets, the rain pattering outside the windows. The little girl sat silently beside Rick, her small hands still tightly holding the old doll, an indispensable part of her difficult life. The light from the street lamps fell on her face, creating strange shadows on her wet face. The tears had not yet dried, and the girl's eyes were still filled with fear. Rick was in no hurry. He knew that not everything in life could be solved immediately. Sometimes, in difficult situations, a little time, patience, and kindness were enough to bring hope. Although he wanted to find a solution quickly, he knew that rushing would not help in this situation. "What is your name, little girl?" Rick asked, his voice soft, without any urgency in the question. He wanted her to feel safer, wanted her to open up to him. The question was not an interrogation, but an invitation to share. The girl looked up, her eyes still sad, but no longer naive. "My name is Lily," she answered in a soft voice, as if she wanted to hide the deep sadness in her heart. "Your mother used to call you Lily." Rick smiled slightly, though he didn't say anything, but that smile was enough to make the little girl feel a little warm. He continued driving, while Lily sat beside him, starting to feel safe in the presence of this man. Even though he wasn't a relative, the kindness and gentleness in his treatment had somewhat eased the anxiety in her heart. "We'll find your mother. Don't worry," Rick added, as if to comfort her, although, in his heart, a series of questions was still there. Lily's story was unclear. She didn't remember her exact home address and didn't know how to contact her mother, but she could remember small details about the neighborhood, about the stores her mother often took her to. Each of her stories was a piece of the puzzle that Rick had to arrange, to find traces and bring her back to her family. Lily began to recall other details about the neighborhood. Vague, but at least they gave Rick a sense of direction. She mentioned a toy store near her house, where her mother often took her to buy gifts on special occasions. That was a detail that Rick thought might be an important clue. He remembered the streets in the area and started driving in the direction she pointed. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the car seemed to calm down. Lily was silent, her eyes following the raindrops, still falling outside the window. She didn't say anything more, but Rick felt a change in her. She no longer looked at him with fear or doubt. Instead, there was a little bit of hope in her eyes, small, but enough to make Rick feel that he was doing the right thing. The sense of responsibility in his heart grew. He was not just a stranger helping, but he seemed to have become a part of her journey, a part of the story that she would remember for the rest of her life. The rain continued to fall, but Rick's car continued to glide through the empty streets. With each passing minute, Lily's mood became heavier. She began to feel tired. The cold feeling from the thin coat still couldn't dispel the cold that was surrounding her. But Rick couldn't let her suffer any longer. He saw a house ahead, probably the place the girl had described in her story. Rick slowed down and drove slowly, while Lily looked out the window with hopeful eyes. Just then, as they passed a small intersection, Rick saw a house with a red wooden door. Could this be the place Lily had described? He stopped the car, turned off the engine, and looked closely at the house. In front of the door, a woman was waiting, her eyes worried, looking around. It was Lily's mother. Rick didn't say anything more, just gently opened the car door and looked at Lily. The girl sat motionless, but her eyes lit up, filled with joy and peace of mind. She quickly opened the car door and ran towards the woman who was waiting. Her mother recognized Lily immediately, rushed towards her daughter, and hugged her tightly in her arms. The mother's tears fell, mixing with the raindrops. And Lily also cried in her mother's comfort. Rick stood from afar, witnessing that moment, feeling an invisible happiness spreading in his heart. He knew that he had done the right thing, and even though it was just a small action, it could change the life of a family. And that was the most important thing. Lily and her mother, now reunited, stood there in each other's warm arms. In the cold rain, the mother's tears continued to fall, but they were tears of gratitude and happiness. Her mother held Lily tightly as if never wanting to let go. At that moment, Rick stood by, not saying a word, just silently observing, but in his heart, a warm feeling gradually spread. He didn't need recognition, just the knowledge that his small act had brought a family back together. The rain was still falling, but the sky seemed to be brightening. Rick felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The mother turned to Rick, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you so much," she said, her voice choking. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't know where to find my daughter. Thank you for helping." Those words weren't just ordinary thanks, but sincere words from the bottom of her heart. Rick smiled slightly. "No need to thank me," Rick replied, his voice low but still gentle. "I just did what needed to be done." And small acts of kindness didn't always need to be greeted with words of thanks. Sometimes, a sincere act of help was enough, and all he needed was to see the joy on the girls' and her mother's faces. After a while, Lily and her mother were still standing there, not wanting to leave each other, but her mother's eyes looked towards Rick like a wordless plea. "We can't let you go without thanking you again. Would you stay for dinner?" the mother asked, the gratitude in her eyes indescribable. Rick shook his head gently. "I'm not bothering you. You need time together." He smiled, then paused, then continued. "I just hope Lisa is safe." "Shh!" Lily looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Uncle. You're my hero." Those words were like a warm breeze, sweeping away all the tension in Rick's heart. He couldn't believe that a small action could bring such great joy, not only to her, but also to himself. As Rick returned to his car, he took one last look at the small family. The rain was still falling, but his heart was strangely warm at this moment. Even though he couldn't always help the people around him, at this moment, he had done the right thing, something that truly mattered. Rick drove home, but he no longer felt as tired and pressured as when he started the trip, although work still awaited him. His actions today had made him feel extremely peaceful in his heart. Sometimes, a small action can create a great change, not only for the recipient, but also for the doer. The next day, while Rick was working in the office, a letter unexpectedly arrived. It was from Lily's mother. In the letter, she sent her sincere thanks to Rick for helping her daughter and her family during a difficult time. Along with it was a small picture that Lily had drawn, showing Rick driving with a warm house in the background. On the picture, there was a handwritten message. "Thank you, Uncle Rick, my hero." Rick looked at the letter and the picture for a moment. Although no words of thanks could fully express Lily's family's gratitude, the simple words in Lily's letter and picture warmed his heart. He realized that sometimes seemingly small things can leave the deepest impression on a person. Yesterday's act of kindness not only helped a little girl return to her mother, but also helped him realize that in life, such moments are what really matter. Rick continued his work, but this story remained in his heart, a reminder that kindness is never in vain, and that sometimes a small act can change someone's life. As Rick looked at the picture and Lily's letter, he couldn't help but feel a little strange in his heart. He, who always kept a tough and calm exterior, now felt a warm feeling rising in his heart. Although these were very small things to him, they were extremely special. The sincere thanks from his mother and Lily's picture of him all served as a reminder that sometimes seemingly simple action can change a life. People don't always receive such marks, and he knew he was lucky to be able to help someone in a time of need. Rick put the letter and the picture aside and continued working, but his mind kept thinking about that little family. He thought about Lily, about the moment she ran to her mother in her warm arms, about the peace in her mother's eyes when they reunited. It was an image he would never forget. That image was like a ray of light shining into his life, making him realize that no matter how difficult or busy life is, sometimes we need to stop, look around, and help those in need. Those moments, no matter how small, are the things that bring fulfillment to life. As each day passed, Rick continued his work, but during his breaks, such stories appeared in his mind. He realized that what he did was not only for his benefit or work, but also partly for the people around him. The feeling of helping others, seeing the joy and peace in their eyes, is what makes him feel valuable and that this life has meaning. Rick Harrison did not help the girl for fame or attention, but simply because he knew that helping others was the right thing to do. He not only provided the girl with immediate support, but also helped reunite her family, bringing peace of mind to those who were worried. This helps us realize that kindness does not have to have a great purpose, just doing good deeds sincerely. This story makes us reflect on how we treat people around us, especially in difficult times. This makes us ask the question, how many times have we seen someone in trouble but rushed past without stopping? So, let's take a moment to listen and help when we can, because every small act of kindness can make a difference.